Question. A lot of Eastern human teachers say that without a human teacher, Satan is our teacher. I acknowledge our ego can be a false teacher, but why do they not acknowledge the true inner teachers? Well, okay, so what I have explained in many of my videos is that there is a group of beings that are acting as false teachers. They are seeking to deliberately deceive us. And you can call this Satan, or you can call them fallen beings, or false teachers, or false hierarchy, whatever name you want to use. I have a video that's called How the World Was Created. And I explained in there that there were some beings that rebelled against growth. And they are attempting to force their way into the spiritual realm by glorifying the ego. It's basically elevating the ego to the status of a god, and then they think God will have to allow it into heaven, which of course is never going to happen. So these are what we can call false teachers. And so I understand that these traditions that say this, they are aware that they are false teachers, and they are aware also that many students, when they become open to the spiritual side of life, they can be attracted to and deceived by these false teachers. And that's why, as I've said in some other answers on similar questions, that the traditions are set up to give people a certain protection. But the problem with that is that there is nothing on earth that is guaranteed. There is nothing that can 100% guarantee that you are not being deceived. Because part of the spiritual path, and this is very important to understand this, part of the spiritual path is that we learn to discern intuitively. And what it really means is that we learn to read energy, we learn to read vibration from a purely intuitive viewpoint. And this is really the only way we can discern between a true teacher and a false teacher. Because the false teachers are very good at disguising themselves and appearing, it says in the Bible that Satan can appear as an angel of light. So they're good at disguising themselves, and therefore there is no way with the outer mind, with the rational, analytical mind, to tell the difference. But you can tell the difference by reading vibration. And it's not really as difficult as it might seem, even though we are in the modern rational age where a lot of people discount intuition. But I think all spiritual people have some degree of intuition. It's just a matter of sharpening it. And one way to do it, a simple way to do it, is close your eyes, think about a certain teacher or teaching, and just sense what happens in the center of your chest. This is what is called the heart chakra. And just sense the energies. Do they go up? Do they go down? Are the energies lowered or are they raised up? And this is a very simple measure that you can train yourself to apply, where you can sense this intuitively. And so a lot of Eastern human teachers say that without a human teacher, Satan is our teacher. Well, that can be the case, but it isn't necessarily the case. I mean, that's a very simplified viewpoint. And you could say, what if the human teacher is not a genuine teacher? What if the human teacher is deceived by his ego? What if the human teacher is a fallen being who's seeking to glorify himself by attracting as many students to him as possible, and he does this by claiming that he's the ultimate guru and he's enlightened and he's reached the highest level of consciousness and this and that. And he causes people to uncritically submit to him and never dare to question their loyalty to this teacher. That could be as dangerous as anything on the spiritual path. So what I'm saying is there is no guarantee here. But there are certainly false teachers, and it is necessary as a spiritual student to consider this. Probably not in the beginning for many people. I mean, as I've said before, there are stages on the spiritual path, and many people, they become open to the spiritual side of life, they find some kind of spiritual teaching, and for a time they just need to study and practice whatever they find that appeals to them. But then after some time, you need to then use your discernment to evaluate, is this really where you need to stay for the rest of your life, or do you need to move on to something else? And this is again a matter of intuition. It's not a matter of deciding with the outer mind. Now it's clear, as the person says, I acknowledge our ego can be a false teacher. And it's very important also to realize that. That's why I've given my playlist about ego illusions, ego games, and ego dramas. And so it's important to acknowledge that the ego will try and stop our spiritual goals by getting us to go into a blind alley. And one blind alley can be this blind obedience to an outer teacher or a specific tradition, where we think this is where we need to stay for the rest of our lives. But as I've also explained, we each have an individual life plan. So there are often stages in the plan. So it may be in your divine plan to find a spiritual teaching or guru, but it could also be that there comes a point when you need to step up to something else. And if you're not open to that because you decide with the outer mind, I have to be loyal to this guru for the rest of my life, then you can miss an important opportunity for growth. Now, why do these traditions, Eastern human teachers, why do they not acknowledge the true inner teachers? Well, as I've said in other answers, the goal of a valid spiritual teacher is to make himself or herself obsolete, because the student no longer needs the outer teacher, because the student has established contact with the inner teacher, which is your higher self and the ascended masters. So I would say any tradition that doesn't acknowledge that, I won't necessarily say it's a false tradition, but it hasn't followed the times. Whereas I've explained many times that we are moving into the age of Aquarius, and there's a whole new approach to spirituality there. And as I also said, so many people are awakening to the spiritual side of life, they can't all find a physical guru. So therefore there's a need for gurus that can work with people individually, but they're not in the physical realm. And that's of course the ascended masters that are assigned to be those kind of gurus for planet Earth. So if you don't acknowledge that, you haven't followed the times. You don't realize the times have shifted. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a false guru, but you are not really teaching the most constructive teaching for this age. And so the question is, when does that become false then? Because it's actually deceiving people and holding them at a certain level that's lower than where they could be. But anyway, that's just a matter of how you want to define it. I'm not really big on the whole true and false thing, although I think it is necessarily, as I said, to recognize there are certainly beings who are trying to deceive us and derail our spiritual progress. If you don't recognize that, it's difficult to go beyond a certain point on the spiritual path, because you will tend to go into this blind alley where you think, oh, now I found the ultimate spiritual teaching or the ultimate guru, so I just need to stay here for the rest of my life, and I don't need to use my intuition anymore because my outer mind can decide this is where I need to be. And that doesn't lead to maximum progress.